9/11, September 11, 2001. Everybody that remembers that day knows exactly where they were when they heard the news. Connie and I and our daughter Chris were in the suburb of Cairo where we lived, and in the afternoon, and we received a call from our daughter Catherine, who lives in Washington D.C., saying that someone had flown a plane into one of the towers, twin towers in New York. I was like, what? We had recently we got cable and TV, so we were able to we got right away got on our TV, got in the news, and we were actually watching what was unfolding when the second plane flew into the second tower. It was horrific. It was unbelievable, and it was we just sat in horror. And as things unfolded, then of course we learned of two other aircraft, one that came near the Pentagon, hit the Pentagon, and then another that was, I think, determined it was going to go to the White House, but it was crashed instead in the fields of Wheaton, Pennsylvania. But in any event, it was incredible. Now, we, of course, began to pray, and we had a nephew who worked at the Pentagon, and it was several hours before we discovered that he was okay, although at least two or three of his friends, colleagues he worked with, lost their lives there at the Pentagon. And so we were trying to process all this, and here we are in an Egyptian neighborhood near Christian school, but there were foreigners around, but most of our neighbors were Egyptian Muslims, and it was it more than interesting as we would come out and these there were two taxi drivers especially that I've already told you about one previous video, another one coming up, M1 and M2, and they begged us not to leave. And in fact, there was a general denial on the part of Egyptians that this could happen. Anybody in the household of Islam would do this, and especially not Egyptians. So they were blaming, they had all kinds of conspiracies, not all kinds, but I mean, at least two or three that I heard of who would be responsible, who would do such a thing. Of course, it turned out that there were Egyptians who were part of that. They were not the total number of men, but there were some Egyptians who were part of that. And we chose not to talk about that, but it was eventually accepted by those around us, and they just felt terrible and apologized, and one of them even said, "Look, we'll protect you. Please don't go." We had a plan for leaving, and Connie and I had a system worked out. School was postponed for a couple of days, and then they met to discuss things going forward. It was very interesting because there were some of the students even that were not at all unhappy that it happened, and that was, of course, disconcerting to not only Americans but others who were students, because there were students from 60 countries who were a part of the American school there. So we began to just we tried to decide what are we going to do, and if we need to leave, we had it worked out to where Connie could, if she could get to Chris, Connie would go and get Chris out of the country, and then if I was there to get Chris, I would do that. Anyway, we had it worked out that we would either separately, Connie and I, one of us with Kristen, would get out of the country, and we had a fall back in England, and we sort of had that in place, but felt like we were going to stay, but you had to wait to see what would happen. So one of the nights we were, that very night, we were working in an area near a balcony on our apartment, and there was a little work area there between the bedrooms, and we were there. There's a couch and a desk and a computer, and so Connie and Chris and I were there, and in that area, and we were talking about it, of course, and Chris said, "Daddy, I'm scared." I said, "Well, yeah, me too. This is scary." Let's be honest about it. So we prayed together, and as we were sitting there reading and whatever we were doing there in that little study area, there was a group of young men who I hesitate to call them a mob, but I mean there were probably 20 of them or so. They came around the corner from the mosque near our house and came right next to our building in the street, just shouting anti-American things. And so that was one of the things that we experienced. And really, in terms of where we lived, it was the only so-called negative thing that we experienced. And we found that it actually gave us opportunities to talk to them about why we were there and how we're staying and about things that matter and to accept their condolences for us as Americans. Of course, there were men and women from other countries besides the U.S., but we were Americans, and so they were expressing condolence for that. So we went ahead and we began to we continued to stay there and to interact with people, and at times wondering is are there going to be any repercussions? Is there anybody going to act this out in an aggressive or negative way toward us? And that did not happen by anybody, not even verbally. So we were grateful for that. I want to tell you about an incident that happened with one of our other taxi drivers, M2, and I'll save that for another video.